You think you know madness. You think you've heard every twisted tale history has to offer. Caligula, the unhinged Roman emperor, infamous for his cruelty and excess, has been called many things. A tyrant, a sadist, a lunatic. But what if I told you those are the sanitized versions, the bedtime stories, because the real Caligula was something else entirely. This is the man who turned his palace into a brothel, who appointed his horse as a high-ranking official, and who believed himself to be a living god. But nothing, not his orgies, not his assassinations, not his divine delusions, nothing compares to what he did to his own sister. He didn't just love her, he married her. And then he did something even darker, something almost unimaginable. This is not just a scandal, this is a descent into the most depraved corners of human power, a story of incest, divinity, madness, and blood, all wrapped in a toga and crowned with a laurel. What you're about to hear isn't myth, it's real, it's documented, and once you know it, you can't unknow it. It begins, as many Roman tragedies do, with a family already drenched in ambition and death. Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, was never supposed to rule. But fate and a series of untimely murders cleared his path to the throne. When he became emperor at just 24, the Senate rejoiced. They thought he'd be the next Augustus. They were wrong. At first, he played the part, the golden boy of Rome, charming, generous, beloved by the people. But behind that smile, something was boiling, and then it snapped. Some say it was illness. Others say it was always there, waiting. Either way, the man who once kissed babies in the Forum began executing senators, feeding prisoners to wild beasts, and laughing as men were tortured at banquets. But even that wasn't enough to satisfy him. Caligula's hunger was not just for power, it was for worship. He didn't want to rule like a man. He wanted to be adored like a god. He erected statues of himself in the temples, dressed as Jupiter, and demanded sacrifices in his name. And who better, he believed, to stand at his side as goddess and consort than his sister, Drusilla. She wasn't just any sister, she was his favorite. From childhood, they were inseparable. But when Caligula took power, that bond twisted into something darker and far more disturbing. The whispers began. Drusilla was always at his side. They dined together, traveled together, slept behind the same guarded doors. And then, just as the rumors reached a fever pitch, Caligula made it official. He married her. Yes, you heard that right. The Roman emperor legally married his own sister. The court was stunned, the Senate horrified, but no one dared oppose him, because to cross Caligula was to disappear permanently. Those who once whispered now bowed, and Caligula reveled in it. He declared Drusilla the new Venus, goddess of love, beauty, and incestuous power. Coins were minted in her image. Priests were assigned to her cult. She wasn't just the emperor's bride. She was divine, holy, untouchable, until she died. And this is where the story takes a turn so grotesque it barely seems human. They said it was a fever, a sudden illness, but no one really knows how Drusilla died. Some whisper it was poison, others that Caligula himself was responsible. What's certain is that her death broke him, or perhaps completed his transformation into the monster history tried to bury. The man who once kissed the feet of senators now screamed through marble corridors, weeping, howling, lashing out at gods for stealing his goddess. And then, in the madness of grief, he made her immortal. He deified her, officially, not as a symbol or gesture, but by law. He had her declared a literal goddess of the Roman Empire. Temples were built in her name, sacrifices burned in her honor, and Caligula, in full divine regalia, led the worship. But even that wasn't enough, because Caligula didn't just want the world to mourn her, he wanted her back. So he kept her body, not for burial, not for honor, he kept her corpse. Roman historians, Seneca, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, they hint at the unthinkable, that Caligula slept beside Drusilla's decaying body, that he whispered to her, wept over her, touched her. They say he believed she was still with him, her spirit fused into his, watching over him as a divine wife. And then, the most horrifying rumor of all, that when she was cremated, when her body was turned to ash, Caligula ate her remains. They say he believed it was a sacred act, a final union of god and goddess, the consumption of divinity. He called it a sacrament. And Rome said nothing, because by now Rome was terrified. The senators no longer debated, they groveled. The people no longer cheered, they watched in silence. Caligula, drunk on incest, power, and megalomania, had become something worse than a tyrant. He had become untouchable. He would host feasts where guests were forced to watch executions between courses. He would laugh as screams echoed over his wine. He joked that he could slit any man's throat and have it labeled divine justice. He once told a senator, "Remember, I can do anything to anyone," and he meant it. His favorite game, picking random citizens citizens from the crowd, accusing them of treason, and watching them be dragged off screaming while he dipped his bread in honey. One day, he turned to his guards and asked, "Should I kill everyone here, or just the important ones?" No one laughed. They couldn't, because they knew he wasn't joking. But Caligula's reign couldn't last forever. Even in ancient Rome, where power was worshipped, there was a limit. And Caligula, he sprinted past it with blood on his hands and a grin on his face. The whispers turned into schemes. In the shadows of Rome's marble halls, a plot began to take shape. Senators, guards, even members of his own household, those who once trembled at the sound of his sandals, started to speak the unspoken. Caligula had to die. The final straw, no one knows for certain. Some say it was when he declared he'd move the capital from Rome to Egypt and rule as a pharaoh. Others claim it was the day he demanded to be worshipped not just as Jupiter, but as the god above all gods, the one above the heavens, the end of the Roman world. But maybe it was just exhaustion, an entire empire worn out by terror. And so, on a cold January day in 41 AD, as Caligula walked through a tunnel beneath a theater, he was met not with cheers, but with steel. The assassins didn't stop with one blow. They stabbed him again and again and again until the god emperor lay twitching on the floor in a pool of his own blood. The crowd outside had no idea what had happened. Inside, the empire's nightmare had finally ended, or so they thought, because even in death, Caligula remained a legend. The stories did not die with him. They grew. They festered. Historians struggled to separate fact from horror. Did he really eat his sister's ashes? Did he really sleep beside her corpse? Did he marry her? Or simply convince the world they were divine twins destined to rule beyond mortality? Here's what we do know. He destroyed lives with the flick of a finger. He twisted Rome's morality into something unrecognizable. And in the ruins of his sanity, he dragged the empire into a cult of blood, lust, and fear. But perhaps that's the real story. Not a man driven mad by power, but a world that allowed it. A senate that bowed instead of fighting. A population that cheered instead of questioned. A system that crowned a monster and watched him devour everything, including the people he claimed to love most. So now I ask you, was Caligula a victim of trauma and unchecked grief? Or was he a true-born tyrant, twisted from birth, unleashed by the throne? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this Roman scandal was the peak of depravity, you haven't even scratched the surface. Because the ancient world, it's darker than you ever imagined. Hit that subscribe button and prepare to go deeper, much deeper.